What if humanity's greatest war never really ended? What if the warships drifting out there aren't just ships? Drop a comment if you dare to skin a Terran warship. And stay to see why you never should. They believed they'd seal their victory for eternity. They trusted the endless gulf between the stars to bury their abomination in silence. But some horrors don't die. They wait, coiled behind iron and secrets. And when one reckless soul cracked the ancient seal, the cosmos tasted terror all over again. Lend me your ears. Once you learn what breathes in the bones of Solarian Dread Cruiser, you'll wish the void had kept its mouth shut. Before we venture into the pitch-black corridors between suns, steel your courage. This is a truth they pledged never to unearth. Ready yourself. Because once you glimpse what festers inside humanity's ghost fleet, you'll never sleep beneath the stars the same way again. Drifting in the cold gulf of eternity, untold empires rose and fell, each forging its mark through impossible science, living constructs, and ideologies stranger than any orbit they claimed as home. From this cosmic garden bloomed the sovereign Concord, a conclave of the universe's self-proclaimed apex minds, zealous in their pursuit to classify, dissect, and bend every other species to their dominion. For generations they expanded unchecked, devouring entire civilizations, binding their knowledge into the endless archives of their supremacy. Resistance was a dream, until the day they collided with Earth's children. At first, the Concord cataloged the Terrans as they would any curious infestation. They scribbled the species away under primitive technological upstarts. Another footnote in their grand ledger. Their scribes detailed how these stubborn primates dragged themselves in the mud of Sol's third rock, lashed together crude chemical coffins, then staggered out further on sputtering ion torch ships. Their craft lacked the liquid elegance of the Ketherese star lattice vessels. They knew nothing of the Zyphar symbiotic star beasts, nor could they match the mind-rending psionics of the Vork's oracles. Yet something in the skeleton of these Solarian cruisers unsettled even the most jaded Concord auditors. Their first real encounter came against the lore keepers of Sunrail, a species addicted to unraveling every scrap of the universe's mysteries. Their fabled thought forges prided themselves on peeling back the armor of any starcraft, no matter how deeply shrouded. For them, knowledge was breath. So when the Sunrail probes drifted near the Solarian Warhawk SSV remnant, they did what they always did. They peered inside. What they uncovered clawed at sanity. The remnant shell, to the untrained eye, was nothing special. Layered composites, grav shield lattice, standard reflective plating. But the deeper their sensor tendrils reached, the more the feed spiraled into gibberish. One instant, the core shrieked reactor fission, then morphed into antimatter vortex, only to dissolve into spectrums of energy unknown to any science in the Concord vaults. Its weapon systems flickered like ghosts, rail batteries, then quantum lances, then monstrous cannons that bent reality in ways no equation could explain. Stranger still, cavernous vaults hidden within the ship devoured the scans entirely, absolute voids that swallowed every wisp of the Sunrail arrays hurled at them. Then, as if reality itself recoiled in horror, the sovereign Concord's entire web of watchful eyes went blind. Not just the sensors fixed on the remnant. Every array, every orbital weave, even the neural spines fused into Sunrail custodians erupted in a storm of static and banshee shrieks. Monitors convulsed in their thrones, eyes bursting red as raw code boiled their thoughts to ruin. Some crumpled before they could cry out. Others shredded their own faces with trembling claws, gasping about a voice tangled in the wires, murmuring secrets too monstrous to hold. It took the Sunrail cycles to stitch their consciousness grid back together. When they did, they etched one commandment into the core of their creed. Never again shall a lore keeper pry into a Solarian ship. The Concord sneered. Surely it was a fluke, a glitch spawned from primitive filth. But the nightmare reared its head again and again. The Correllant, those weavers of living processors, tangled reefs of synaptic spines and organic filaments, unleashed a bloom of tendril drones to taste the abyss within a Solarian dread cruiser. The moment their probes brushed the vessel's ghostly halo, the tendrils shriveled like roots in a poisoned sea, their biomass rotting to sludge as Corlin sages watched in breathless dread. When the Vorix oracles, minds vast enough to hear a city's heartbeat from orbit, cast their astral senses toward a lone Solaren battleship adrift near their border, they returned hollow, their psychic threads unraveled in the starless gulf, leaving behind twitching shells who whisper broken prayers to shadows no one else could see. Now, in the Concorde's deepest chambers, a single question festers like an unhealed wound. What nightmare do they truly uncover in this savage breed called humankind? And what broods within those iron leviathans that the cosmos itself dares not behold? Even the Olari, prophets who once bragged they could predict the death of empires before the first missiles flew, found their visions curdling to static when they peered upon a Solaren warhulk. Where they should glimpse tides of victory and loss, they found only a white storm, or worse, saw themselves already drifting lifeless among frozen wreckage long before a single cannon roared. The final rupture came when the sovereign Concorde's ruling synod demanded one ultimate incursion. They summoned a grand flotilla, armored in the most intricate sensor cathedrals ever spun from flesh and alloy, and formed a ring around a lone Solaren juggernaut, the SSV Harrowmark. What came next was smothered beneath vaults of secrecy and silenced dispatches. What scraps slipped through Telvin Armada swallowed whole, as if the void itself dined on steel and souls. No distress calls, no shattered hulls drifting through the abyss. Only absence, a perfect silence that left the universe to wonder if some doors are better sealed forever. In the smoldering wake of that cosmic vanishing act, the Concorde laid down a decree carved in iron and dread. No mind, no matter how exalted or reckless, would ever again dare to peer into the armored marrow of a Solaren titan. Whatever coiled in that abyss of steel and shadow was a secret never meant for any living soul to hold. They tried, of course, to snuff out the rumor storm, official denials, Dr. Data, veiled threats whispered in Starcourt halls. But rumor has a gravity all its own a pull no sanction can stop. Before long, the tale burned like solar flame through the void, carried by hush-hush tavern murmurs and corrupted data spikes. Across the scattered void kingdoms, spies, strategists, and mad theorists obsessed over what truly devoured those who dared to stare too deep. Some swore humanity had torn open a quantum shroud, so profound it warped the minds of any who glimpsed it, snapping reason like brittle glass. Others claimed the ships were clad in some unthinkable material that made physics itself a lie, a trick turning reality into rumor. But the bleakest whispers came from the Vorix oracles, those same soul listeners who'd crawl back broken from their psychic plunge. They whispered of a terror stranger than any algorithm. They claimed Solaren dreadships were not dead metal. They were alive. The doubters laughed, for a time. But those who'd stood watch on a star bridge and glimpsed a Solaren juggernaut gliding through the black knew better. They saw in the way these iron behemoths pivoted like predators, the way they dodged salvo after salvo with uncanny precision, how they seemed to lurk just outside the killing arc, as if they weren't piloted by human hands, but awake, listening, judging, hungering for the perfect moment to strike. Only one kin, the reckless and blood-wild Kaur, refused to bow before whispers and dread. Where cautious minds crept back, the Kaur charged forward with savage delight. Conquest pulsed in their veins. Every unclaimed star was a throat waiting to be bared. With brutal pageantry, they forged an armada, one of the largest slaughter clades ever fused together, and fixed their sights on a Solaren redoubt hidden among the splintered rocks of Nerax's expanse. At the shadowed core of that fortress drifted a lone human juggernaut, the SSV Nullwake. By every measure of reason, the Kaur should have feasted on that lone ghost of iron. Their spear line dwarfed the Solaren ship 100-fold. They bore cataclysm lances and event horizon batteries, weapons that had cracked open gas giants in wars gone by. Their warlords were forged in centuries of blood-right crusades, each a legend etched into bone. But the moment they closed the void, the fabric of the possible seemed to twist. The Nullwake did not drift like mortal craft. It moved with an unnatural poise, slipping through barges like it could taste each barrage before it bloomed. Beams meant to pierce its hull kissed empty space. or more cruelly, ricocheted back, slicing to the Kara's own battle claws in a dance of friendly fire. Then their command relays splintered into something unrecognizable. Warlords bellowed commands down their Vox channels, only to hear their own voices come back to them, twisted, layered with echoes that spoke in chords not meant for flesh and bone. Some heard themselves begging, "Flee!" Others heard nothing but a suffocating hush, the same crushing silence that lives between the stars. And then the shrieking began. It did not thunder from the No-Wake's cannons, no barrage, no burning salvo. The nightmare blossomed inside the Kar fleet's own veins. Clans of iron-blooded soldiers, ace pilots, battle scribes. They dropped where they stood, raking at their skulls as if to rip out whatever had crawled in. No missile touched them. No beam cleaved their hulls. And yet they fell, minds eaten hollow by something unseen, something ancient and hungry. One Kar War leader, moments before an invisible force unstitched his command ship like rotting fruit, forced a final data scream through the abyss toward the homehold. His message was dissected, then buried beneath black codes never to be spoken aloud again. It was only a single fractured breath. "The ship, it's looking at me." When the storm of silence settled, only the No-Wake drifted, a phantom amid drifting ghosts. No wreckage to salvage, no slag to mourn. The Kara's pride, that colossal slaughter fleet that had toppled whole star sets in centuries of conquest, was simply erased. From that bleak hour on, the Kara, once the predators that haunted the void's darkest corners, would never speak the Juggernaut's name. No archives recorded the loss. No cenotaph were carved. The massacre bled into myth, traded in hushed taverns by those still mad enough to wonder what pulses in the iron bones of Solaran dreadship. Yet one truth carved itself in the marrow of every race that sailed the cosmic deep. No cunning mind, no savage legion, no curious I would ever again dare peel back the veil of a human war beast. A hush clung to every Solaran shadow gliding through black, but that hush was more than terror. It was a vow, a gravestone drifting through the infinite dark, etched with a single lesson. There are thresholds you do not cross, eyes you do not meet. And so entire civilizations learn to avert their gaze, turning senses away, shielding minds as if glimpsing that living paradox might unmake them too. Solaran ships became like black stars clad in iron, enigmas best left unchallenged, drifting monoliths hunting the eternal night. And yet, in every age, there is always one soul who cannot help but listen when the abyss calls their name. The Ziranai, ageless, imperious, minds sharpened to shred the tapestry of existence until it lay trembling at their feet. Their seers boasted mastery over threads of being itself, weaving hours around their thoughts, kneading the odds like pliant clay. To the Ziranai, the rest of the starborn kin were mewling whelps squabbling in the shadow of true brilliance. They had no patience for the sovereign Concord's meek restraint. To them, fear was the crutch of lesser minds. Where cautious souls glimpse a chasm of nightmares, the Ziranai saw only a vault begging to be pillaged. So when fractured rumors of Solaran leviathans drifted through their crystalline sanctums, they did not tremble. They'd never faced a human envoy across a treaty table, never tested their mettle against them in the void's crucible. To the Ziranai, Earth's children were nothing more than savage tinkers who'd stumbled, blind and lucky, into a power far beyond their worth. Whatever slumbered within those iron husks could, and would, be carved open. So the High Circle decreed the birth of Project Obsidian's Shroud. A lone craft, the Etherin Lance, was forged, an apex predator draped in dimensional veils, so deep it drifted like a phantom between what is and what might be. No cannons bristled from its flanks, no missile racks primed. Only the most merciless suite of cognition scouring arrays the Ziranai had ever wrought. It could taste the heartbeat of a collapsing sun if given cause. Its prey? The SSV Umbra, a Solaran dread cruiser prowling the far rim of human dominion, distant enough for no rescue to come in time. The Etherin Lance hung at the event horizon of detection, cloaked in the hush of unreality. No signals, no weapons armed, just a cold hunger of dissection, At first, all readings fell into line. Mundane hull matrices, unremarkable heat blooms, faint wrinkles in the local grav well. Then they took the final step. They bared their phase-piercing cortex nodes, scanners meant to peel the skin from existence itself. That was when the Umbra turned, not with a ponderous drift of patrol ship shifting course, but with a coiled snap of something sentient, a hunter turning its unseen eyes upon the eyes that watched. There was no sane path by which the Solarian behemoth should have sensed them. The lance's shroud spun across the folds between what was and what never would be. And yet, the instant they peered inward, the Leviathan peered back. A hush drowned the bridge. For the first time in eons, every Ziranai aboard tasted a pressure that smothered their timeless arrogance, an emotion they'd forgotten since they first shackled the hours to their will. Dread. The lead time shaper, a mind that once carved the veins of tomorrow like an artist with a scalpel, faltered. His fingers hovered above the command lattice. Frozen by a dread, he could not cipher into equations or sigils. Then the ship began to die, system by system. The Etherin Lance's heart guttered out. Scanners vanished. Dimensional veils tore like brittle silk. Grav holes, atmosphere keepers, silent as an ancient crypt. Panic bloomed across the observation spire, iridescent flesh flickering with frantic pulses of fear and rage. No sabotage alarms. No hacking signatures. Whatever was unwinding their sanctuary was not outside. It was here, not a code, not an infestation, but something alive. The time shaper's breath caught as the world around him melted. The polished nerve halls, the spear's gleaming vaults, dissolved like breath in a winter grave. He stood alone in a chasm without edges, a formless abyss that breathed as if it hungered for him. Murmurs crawled at the corners of thought. Not language, but the rasp of alien judgment scraping across his skull. Shapes stirred in the dark, each birthing eyes that blinked open just long enough to gaze through him before dripping away. Not curious eyes, but eyes that weighed him like a rotting fruit. The susurrus thickened, each whisper gouging at the borders of sanity. He could not parse the words, but the truth inside him slammed straight through his core. Do not look. The time shaper howled as his mind was hurled back into flesh, vision snapping to the clinical pallor of the Etherin Lance's core chamber. He lay sprawled on the frozen alloy deck, breath splintered into ragged gasps. All around, his crew lived the floor like shattered figurines, eyes stuck wide, jaws twisted mid-scream, each forever frozen in that moment of ruin. The Umbra offered no barrage, no chase, no threat. It simply turned, gliding back to its silent drift, its patrol path unbroken, as if the Etherin Lance and its architect of hubris had never been there at all, as if the hunger of lesser minds was beneath its notice. When scavenger swarms found the drifting corpse of the Etherin Lance cycles later, no voice remained to bear witness to what had come for them. Data cores were slagged, every scrap of the mission garbled to static and ruin. The High Circle tried to bury the stain under vaults of forbidden scrolls, erasing every ghost of Project Obsidian's shroud. But rumor knows no shackles. Secrets seep through traitors' tongues and outlaw relays. Never gaze into the marrow of a Solarian beast. Some truths breathe only for the dark. What the Ziranai suffered rippled through the sovereign concord, like a star's silent detonation. If even the time benders, sculptors of chance and space-time, could not untangle the secret throbbing the spine of Solarian hull, then perhaps, just perhaps, that truth was never meant for any living intellect to cradle. Terror fossilized into silence. Silence hardened into willed ignorance. For decades afterward, no species dared align their sensor webs toward a human shadow, drifting through the void. Encounters with Earth's black ships became ghost stories. Alien navigators quietly peeling off course the moment a Solarian silhouette bled across their scopes. The Concord, so smug in its ledger of every known starborn soul, quietly sheared humankind from its annals. Yet in the hushed corners of buried archives and dim research cells, a few minds refused to let the riddle rot in darkness. The Kalar Enclave, archivists, memory keepers, the eternal pickers of bones and ruin. were not conquerors, nor fools drunk on dominion. They only wanted to understand. To them, the Solarian enigma was the brightest ember in the endless dark. So they cracked the vow of silence. They named it the Shadow Loom. A single Kaler skulk ship, the Inquiry's gift, slipped behind a Terran patrol echelon. They didn't intend to batter the puzzle open. No probes, no cortex piercers, just passive trails, formations, wake patterns, bleed signatures. If they could catch a hint, a heartbeat of order in the chaos, they'd see the outline of the abyss. For weeks they clung to star hollows, drifting into blind spots where no dread cruiser's gaze ever fell. The Solarian phalanx glided on, indifferent, no chase, no sign the Inquiry's gift even existed. It almost made the Kaler crew believe the legends were frayed tales stretched too far. Until, with no tremor warning, the Terran spearhead, the SSV Wraithborn, eased to a dead stop. The rest of the black-armored pride sailed on through night, undisturbed, a river of shadows. But the Wraithborn remained, hanging there, watching, breathing, and in the Inquiry's gift, a chill crawled down every spine that wondered whether the answer they hunted now hunted them. Time hung, confusion rippling through the dim-lit bridge. They hadn't lanced the hull with an intrusive scan, hadn't flicked a single spike at its skin. So why did it feel bone-deep marrow-tight, as though the Wraithborn's gaze pinned them to their own hull? On the Inquiry's deck, the air thickened until it tasted like drowning. Captain Sarathel, an old pathfinder who'd unearthed truths from plagued moons and drowned world alike, stood on the brink of pulling back. They gathered tomes of data, more than enough to mark this venture as legend. But curiosity was the coal that drove the Kaler across the void since the first star rose over their cradle. So, with a flicker of regret burning behind his eyes like a dying star, Sarathel uttered the words that would damn them all. One soft sweep, just enough to see why it lingers. Obedient fingers danced. The arrays unfolded like a hush, delicate, almost devotional. They moved like monks slipping through a cathedral that might stir if roused. For a heartbeat, the void remained calm. Then the Inquiry's gift convulsed as if some unseen hand had clenched its iron bones. Every display guttered to black. Consoles ruptured like bruised fruit, vomiting sparks and bitter smoke. Gravity fractured. Up became down. Down turned into a butcher's field of broken bodies. The crew shrieked as they slammed against ceilings, then floors, limbs bending in ways no bones should. And then the visions came, not through any speaker, but blooming raw inside their skulls. Not words. Echoes. Alien storms that did not belong to them. They saw a world stripped to charred ruin by iron hurricanes. They felt hate, older than memory, deeper than starlight, a tide of black fury vast enough to drown suns. They glimpsed titans whose shadows fell not by starlight, but by something older than light itself. Sarathel dropped to the deck, fingers digging trenches into his scalp, veins rippling like they would burst. Around him, his crew wept and clawed their eyes, spitting shards of babble, splintered phrases about watchers coiled in the abyss. Through that chorus of ruin rose a single voice, cavernous, ancient, older than the sum of their brittle centuries. It was not human, but it carried a rage hammered in the crucibles of human nightmare. You were warned. Then silence crashed down like a falling axe. Days later, the Inquiry's gift drifted over the boundary into the hush of neutral void, carried by the inertia of its own corpse drift. Every soul aboard remained breathing, but none unscarred. Sarathel, the cartographer who once traced the buried veins of dead empires, spoke no more. He simply stared, eyes twin pits that reflected a terror too vast a name. The rest muttered fractured dreams, half-mad tales of hunger lurking behind every Solarian carapace, a presence so immense that even the sovereign Concord had entombed its name. The Kaler high circle smothered a calamity under sealed wards and layers of taboo. And so, the final kin bold enough to taste the riddle joined the rest of the stars, bound by an unspoken pact carved in dread. No mind, however cunning or reckless or ancient, would ever pry at a Solarian hull again, not out of fear of humankind, but of what humankind had dug up and chained in the dark. Across the spiral arms, that hushed covenant endured, a vow that wrapped itself around every starport and deep space relay. It never bled into official ledgers, but every pilot, every code keeper, every scribe of forgotten truths knew it in their marrow. Some doors were never meant to be forced ajar, so no sensors tracked the black shapes drifting like ghosts. No arrays dared taste their signal. Not the ancient seers, not the predator dynasts, not even the fools who once wore curiosity like a king's crown. And yet, somewhere in the creeping dark between worlds, there are always those who can't help themselves. Always the ones who hear every warning as a dare. The Serkari were exactly that breed. Not like the Ziranai, who tried to cage forbidden truths, nor the Kaler, who burned to comprehend. No, the Serkari thrived as merchants of shadows, traffickers of secrets, data jackers, archivists of black markets. To them, hidden knowledge wasn't a rule to be honored. It was the purest coin. So when the rumors of Solarian ships seeped into their dens, how the Concord fell mute, how the brightest minds came back hollow-eyed, they didn't recoil. They leaned in, far out in the dead lanes of uncharted void, where no patrol flags flew and treaties were dust. The Serkari spun their snare. A dead star, a false distress call on an abandoned freight band, a gutted cargo hauler, wired nose to tail with clandestine arrays meant to flay any veil. The ploy was elegant. Draw a Solarian vessel in close. Flip the recorders, siphon every sliver of data into a ghost relay before the Navy smelled blood. Information like that could ransom a world. Some deep pocket lord would pay 10 lifetimes of credits for a glimpse inside the myth. Krellin, the spider who wove his trap, pulled the strings. He wasn't green. He'd heard the bar whispers, the stories of mine seared raw, ships that stared back, but tales were for children. Weak skull snap, he sneered at his crew. We deal in facts. We deal in credits. We'll stare and we'll see the marrow. So the bait hung in the dark, the phantom beacon pulse, the perfect hook, and the humans came. A lone Solarian prowler, the SSV Revenant, dropped from a fold, coasting to the derelict field like a shadow-slick predator. It wasn't some dread leviathan, no war titan dragged out of ancient nightmare songs. Just a lean stalker, black-holed, silent. But the instant Krellin's eyes locked onto its outline, something wormed beneath his ribs, an itch at the base of his spine hissing. Leave now. He spat it out like poison. Light the sweep, he snapped. Doubt flickered in his tech's eyes. But discipline won. The scanners hummed to life. Wave after wave brushing the Solarian hull like cautious fingertips on ancient stone. No sirens. No shrieks. Data poured in neat and stable. Krellin felt triumph crawl up his spine like a living thing. See? All tavern tales. Omen chasers and fools. The score's ours, the prize, we... Then his gaze snapped to the main readout. A blank void. No heat trace, no grav pulse, no mass curve at all. In the real, that was heresy. Even the cleverest cloak bled ripples into the fabric. Even ghosts left a mark. Yet the Revenant recorded as absence. Krellin's guts curdled around his bones. The truth slammed into him like an iron spike. The ship had allowed the scan, not because they'd outwitted the myth, but because the Revenant wanted them to look. Its running lights stayed dark, but the Serkari's own consoles twitched. The old freighter's engines began to hack and stutter, coughing clouds of sour ozone. Krellin seized the edge of his command throne as the air thickened, viscous, smothering. Every inhale grated his chest raw, like breathing through needles dipped in oil. Around him, his crew stumbled, legs buckling, teeth clacking as tremors skittered through muscle and bone. The ship was speaking, not in static, not through wires, but through the marrow. His vision tore like wet paper. The grimy bridge vanished. He stood in a graveyard of worlds, continents scorched to black glass, Oceans vanished into poison clouds. A fleet fractured into drifting iron bones. And overhead, the Terran Leviathans loomed. Never machines, not really. In the furnace of humanity's darkest hour, something ancient had split open. Something that should have died with the fires, but instead rooted itself deep, a howl that refused the grave. When the final human shipwrights sealed steel around their juggernauts, they didn't build vessels. They hammered together tombs. And something inside kept howling. The vision ripped him back like a fishhook through the eye. Krellin hit the deck, acid burning up his throat as he gagged out chunks of thought that felt too real. He scraped at the comm slab, nails shattering, trying to kill the uplink, to shred the stolen glimpse before it devoured him whole. But it was far too late. The Revenant drifted forward, not with engines, not through thrust or cunning vector. It just bled through the black. One heartbeat it loomed before the bow. The next it seeped through the Circary's iron bones. Bulkheads wept strands of ink code. Consoles howled static that tore eardrums raw. Crew dropped, eyes glass black, mouths gaping like broken hinges, but no sound made it out through a haze of searing agony. Krellin watched the console's last number stutter and die, a single message flickering in and out. Data link complete. The treasure they'd ripped from the abyss, the secret they'd thought would make them sovereigns of the black. Gone, fired down some nameless artery of the undernet. Where it landed, he'd never know, and now he'd never tell. The Revenant's voice bled into the hollow behind his eyes, a whisper that tasted of rust and cold stars. Your debt is paid. Then, like the final breath of a dying sun, it was simply gone. No prowler, no Circary crew, no drifting wreck to bury. Just a hush. The stolen shard, that sliver of forbidden marrow that cost him everything, was never found. But out in the gutter lanes of forgotten sectors, where derelict war hulks drift like mausoleums, something began to stir. And this hush that crept through the spiral arms was unlike the old fear. Once, entire civilizations turned away from Solarian dreadships because they dreaded the screaming dark inside. Now, they turned because they understood. Somewhere deep in the iron core of every soul, they felt it. A thing ancient and wrathful had been stirred awake, something no star chart should dare name. For centuries, the sovereign Concord had crowned itself the apex mind of the void, a mind that cataloged every race, indexed every anomaly, wrapped the cosmos in ledgers and law. But there are shadows loose in the abyss that no codex can cage, shapes that swallow those who even whisper their true names. The lost war, the fractured echoes. And now, buried among quarantined vaults and sealed archives, the last forbidden fragments began knitting together. That humanity's greatest battle had never been waged against a rival empire, but against something else. Short, devouring. The Solarians had stood alone in that pitch-dark storm. No allies, no great declarations. And then, like a candle pinched between fingers, it was over. Humanity crawled from the ashes, but no tongue ever dared name what they'd faced. In the first decades, the Concord's archivists believed the easy lie, that the humans had erased their enemies so thoroughly that even memory failed. But the scraps hinted at something far more dreadful. The whispering hulls, the rumor ships. After the Cesari slipped into legend, the pattern twisted, subtle, hidden at first. Solarian dreadnoughts began to appear in corners no star charts marked. They glided through ghost field where old wars had died unnamed. Some loomed above dead worlds, watching tomb cities with silent batteries, their weapons humming but never fired. And then the flickers came. Freight captains, outpost techs, shadow haulers drifting the black lanes. They all spoke of the same shiver. Mid-flight, their sensors would hiccup, a static ripple in the comms, a smear of static across the nav map. No threat, no voice, just a hush. Not a word, not a promise. Just that cold certainty that something ancient had seen them and remembered. Most just killed the feed, shut down the relay, dumped the memory cores, and prayed the static would stay dead. A few hardened captains lost their nerve for good, abandoning ships that now drift cold and empty in the hush between suns. But some, the oldest blades for hire, the war-forged legends who built empires out of plasma and blood, they felt the true shape of it. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. A low snarl from the mouth of a cage they dared not unlatch. Quietly, these warriors slipped away. They dropped banners they carried since the first star fell to their guns. They deserted fleets that would have crowned them immortal. Some vanished to remote exile, ghost worlds where even whispers fear to follow, not because they feared Terran cannons, but because they feared whatever nightmare the Terrans had stitched into iron coffins and called ships. In the echoing halls of the Dominion Ascendant, an emergency conclave convened. They scoured the fracture reports, the garbled wreckage of Cesari's final broadcast. A pattern emerged, clear enough to drain the blood from even the coldest spy master's veins. The humans hadn't won their ancient war by annihilating an enemy. They'd bound it inside. And now, a shard of that buried thing had slipped its cage, flung into the abyss as raw code no mind was meant to see. No one could say who caught that pulse first, only that someone, somewhere, now carried a sliver of the nightmare. So the Ascendant did what it had never done. It signed the first sealed order, a covenant inked in terror, enforced by blade, plasma, and a promise of utter erasure. No species, no fleet, no covert sect, no brilliant rogue archivist would ever peel back a Terran hull again. Any mind reckless enough to pry would not be ended by the humans, but by the Dominion's own hand. Because some monsters feed on curiosity, and if that cage thing ever tore free, no battle armada in the spiral would be enough to chain it down again. In the forgotten hush of the spiral's edge, where no star maps dare mark the void, an abandoned relay sputtered back to life. A lone terminal, dark for decades, spit out the last broken fragments of the Cesari stolen whisper. On its cracked display bloomed a single ghost. Coordinates, a string of numbers gnawing through the static. And out there, beyond every sane chart, in that bleak silence where even suns do not shine, someone that should have slept forever flex inside its armored tomb, waiting for the next fool to ask a question they'd sworn never to speak aloud. A region the charts pretended didn't exist, a sliver of dark so perfect, so venomously quiet, that even the boldest survey probes turned to drifting junk the instant they dared cross its border. Sensors choked there. Engines coughed themselves to death for no reason. Long ago, the Conquered had stitched over this grave with a shroud of silence, so thick no rumor could slip through. But now, something had clawed it back into the living galaxy. Through that breathless gulf drifted a lone vessel, lean, ragged, and nameless. No beacon signature. No registry stamp. A scavenged ghost, welded from stolen hull plates and black market wreckage. The kind of craft that should have known better than to slither here. Inside its ribcage of rusted steel crouched a single soul, Vaya. 10 years she'd chased scraps of myth through the deep black. The fall of the Serkeri, half-caught transmissions that shivered through dark relays, warship shades that prowled through empty starfields like predators in oil. Every thread pointed here. She knew the ancient hush, the Dominion's first sealed order, the law so sacred even pirates and grave robbers obeyed it. Don't look. But Vaya had always been a traitor to fear. Curiosity was the ember that burned her alive, and she'd feed it anything, even her mind. So her half-dead ship crept closer to that forbidden scar. Her readouts fizzed the static. The drives gave a final death rattle and went still. The grav plates flickered under her boots like a dying heartbeat. It felt as though the void itself was folding around her, the black swallowing her bones but refusing to let them sink. She forced her breathing calm, hands fly over manual switches, and then she saw it. At first, it was only a bruise of darker dark. Then its shape emerged, not a ship, not a fortress, a mausoleum, colossal, vast beyond any Terran dreadnought her nightmares had ever conjured. A drifting tomb city, built not for conquest but to hold something too terrible to bury in the dirt. It hung like a dead god in the deep, Engines fossilized, corridors choked with permanent night. But its nearness pressed into her skull, a phantom touch, fingernails dragging at the roots of her mind. All her life she told herself, warships are metal, engines, guts of circuits and steel. But this wasn't forged like a ship. This was a carcass. And inside that carcass, something refused to stay dead. Her pulse danced like a knife on glass, but her fingers held steady. One scan, just one, and she'd cradle the truth no archivist, no Dominion prelate, no trembling spy master ever dare to keep. The scanner croaked awake. Data bled across her screens, and her breath locked in her throat. This thing hadn't been crafted for humans. It had been made from them. Not just steel welded around old Terran blueprints, but veins. Strands of something organic, laced through the iron ribs. Parts of the hull pulsed slow and wet, like the last breath of a giant who would not die. Then the feed convulsed. Screens guttering with lines of code that stuttered across languages no throat had ever spoken. Glyphs slithered, twisting into shapes that broke apart before the mind could grasp them. And beneath it, deeper than her calms, deeper even in thought, came a sound, a whisper that curled through her bones like frost, old and hollow as a grave clawed into empty space. You have seen too much. Via gasped, the cry burning her throat raw as her vision shattered like cracked ice. A storm of images howled through her skull, a war no record dare remember. Entire starfleets flaring like candles snuffed by a hurricane, worlds split open and screaming into the void. A wound so monstrous it could not die, only be entombed. The first dread ships were not ships at all, not weapons, not guardians. They were coffins, vaults, living cages to hold something so hungry it had no name. Humanity had not survived that war. They had survived around it. They had welded their horror into iron ribs and sealed away inside these drifting carcasses. But now, because of her, because the Circary's greed had pried too deep, because too many fools had ignored every star-scorched warning, one was stirring. Her lungs shredded the air as she stumbled for the escape pod. Every step rang with a distant, hungry chorus, a choir of teeth scraping the edge of her mind. Her ship was not dying. It was being devoured from within. That thing in the tomb had tasted her thoughts and wanted more. She slammed a bleeding palm onto the pod's hatch just as the bulkhead behind her folded in, not blasted, not breached, but unspooled like rotted cloth in a gale. The pod screamed free, thrusters howling as her stitched-together vessel dissolved into the dark behind her. For a breathless instant, through the viewport's frost, Via saw it. The dread ship's shape convulsing in the black, its dead hull flickering with sickly, rhythmic pulse. A heartbeat. It was waking, and the void would never sleep again. The pod tumbled, spinning through the abyss like a stone skipped across an ocean of ink. Its lights flickered and gasped, half dead, like her sanity. Via's breath sawed in and out, mist blooming against the cracked glass. The truth she'd stolen from the dark throb behind her eyes, a poisoned knowledge no mind could hold. She'd wanted the secret. She'd set it loose. Now it would not stop with her. Her fingers, raw and trembling, found the battered comms console. Static flared. A last, broken relay, enough to spit a single ember into starless night. She didn't waste it on pleas. Just 3 words. A warning too late. It is awake. The signal skittered through the black like a match in dry brush. The Dominion convulsed in its marble halls. Fleets igniting from nothing. Archives torn open by trembling hands desperate for some ancient defense that might still matter. Councils gathered in vaulted chambers, whispering prayers and burial rites in the same breath. And humanity? They said nothing. No warning. No lie. No vow to hold the nightmare back. The iron dread ships that had drifted, silent sentinels, for centuries in the dark, they stirred. One by one, they pivoted, aligning their cold hearts toward the tomb Via's curiosity had torn open. And somewhere in the void, that old hunger grinned, remembering the taste of stars. Across every fringe outpost, every drifting barge, Every sealed archive vault, the truth settling like venom in a vein. The Terran dreadships had never been weapons. They were wardens. And now, what they had locked away for centuries was stirring, ready to finish what its long-dead jailers could not. Vi never made it home. Days later, a scavenger crew stumbled on her escape pod, drifting at the Dominion's edge. Hull untouched, airlock sealed tight, and no sign of her inside. Just one echo, caught in the pod's dying logs, looping like a ghost across the black. It is awake. But by then, the words didn't matter. Far beyond the reach of any sun, something ancient flexed against its chains. The lost war had never ended. It had only dreamed. Now it would finish what humankind once tried to bury in steel and bone. If this tale left a chill crawling down your spine, just imagine what still sleeps in the dark between stars. Hit that like button if you dare. Subscribe for more forbidden echoes from the void, and tell me in the comments, would you risk scanning a Terran warship? Until next time, keep your sensors cold and your eyes wide open. If this story rattled your sensors, hit that like button and share with someone who thinks they peek inside a Terran dreadship.